After a year of talk, the KCI task force finally makes a terminal decision, plus overriding Nixon. What Missouri's big tax cuts mean to you, and does it spell the biggest defeat of Jay Nixon's term in office? Also this half hour, easing up on marijuana laws in Missouri. Is it just the beginning? Taking streetcars to the Northland. And Kansas lawmakers wrap up their shortest session in 40 years. But what did they achieve? Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes and thank you for joining us on the program that goes beyond the soundbite and takes you behind the headlines making news in Kansas City. We are mixing it up this week with Forbes magazine Missouri writer and Show Me Institute economist Patrick Ishmael, Kansas City Star City Hall reporter Lynn Horsley, Star political reporter, columnist and blogger Dave Helling. Nice of you to find time to appear on local TV after your appearance this week on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow. And around the cozy confines of our week in review table from 41 Action News, Garrett Hake. Now, after a year of study, there's finally a decision. A task force appointed by Kansas City Mayor Sly James says they've wrestled with all of the information and decided that the Metro needs a new single terminal at KCI.
It will enhance the city's image. It will provide new funding opportunities in operations, more efficiencies to running the airport. And it positions the airport for future success.
What the cost of that terminal is, I have no idea. All I can tell you is that we're going to take the information that they've worked hard to gather and the recommendations and do what we need to do in order to reach some determinations.
That video, of course, from 41 Action News. Lynn Horsley, though, after a year of study, some people said, of course, they were going to recommend a single terminal. Was it a foregone conclusion from the beginning?
I think this group really worked hard, did not come in with preconceptions. We all know that Kevin Costner, one of the members, was adamantly opposed to a new terminal, and he remained so even at the end. He was very upset with the recommendation and basically said they didn't have enough information to draw a conclusion. But the group toured the existing airport. They immersed themselves in information about the airport. I think they decided that the existing terminals have so many deficiencies. They're old, they're crumbling. It's very hard to adapt them. I think they do realize it's an expensive proposition, but this is considered a 40 or 50-year investment. One terminal is more efficient. There's operating efficiencies. You save money by having one terminal. So that was what they came up with. Now, this is the start of another conversation. It is not, they will not be bringing bulldozers to the airport next week. The real test now is that the aviation department and the airlines have to negotiate on a final plan, financing mechanism, and that starts now. Within moments, though, of this happening, we were getting tweets and emails from just regular viewers of the program who said, surprise, surprise, yawn, yawn. Were we expecting anything different, Garrett?
I think probably not. You have a panel appointed by the mayor who has been an advocate of the single terminal concept all along. It shouldn't be terribly surprising that his panel comes to that same conclusion. And I think politically this gives him another sort of arrow in the quiver, he and the aviation department. This doesn't bring the bulldozers in tomorrow or anytime in the near future. But when this does go before voters, they can use this to say, look, we did not force this through. We gave this lots of time in front of the public. And it just adds a little bit to that political argument that he and the aviation department are still going to have to make.
But this was a thoughtful group of people, though, who studied this for a year. And you are with an organization that likes to study things and look at things in a well-researched way. There must be something to this, Patrick.
Well, it's good that they studied it, but, you know, I do think that to a great extent, the findings are going to be moot. And I think that Lynn and Garrett talked a little bit about this. There are going to be conversations between the aviation department and the airlines themselves. And over the next 2 years, they'll say a lot. And also, the public's going to get to weigh in on it as well. So there are many steps in this process. This is kind of the beginning still.
So what happens now then, Dave?
Well, as Lynn suggests and Garrett and others, the study of how you pay for this begins. Critical negotiations with the airlines will begin as well. And in fact, Nick, really there are two decisions to be made. First will be whether we can, I say we, users of the airport, airlines and others can afford whatever they want to do. And the airlines will have an enormous role in that because in essence their passengers and their fee structure will have to reflect the vast majority of the money spent out there. So the airlines have an important role. And then the second sort of stop is the people, the vote of the people. And they'll have to decide really whether the convenience questions have been answered. This 50-year decision, is this the best way to go? Let me just say, as a political matter, while this might not have been a surprise, it would have been a major setback for the mayor had the task force made a different recommendation. Because in essence, he would have then, if he wanted a single terminal, have had to explain, why he would go against his own task force. So while this may or may not have been a surprise as a political matter, at least it keeps the single terminal discussion on track, and then these other decisions have to be made.
For the better part of a year, Lynn, we've heard this number, $1.2 billion is the cost of this single terminal, and the mayor's saying this week, we don't know what the number is for this, so we can't say that.
Right. Well, first of all, that estimate was several years ago, so maybe the cost has even gone up. But the airlines are adamant that that's too much money. They think it's too much, especially since the federal government may not be putting as much money into this airport as it has in prior airports. So they want something that's affordable. And I think the aviation department wants to get something as economical as possible. So really the cost structure will have to be reevaluated. I was also going to say that Missouri is unusual. In many states, the voters would not have a say on this. These are revenue bonds. They're not general taxpayer dollars. But because of Missouri law, Kansas City voters will have a say, and this is a steep hill to climb. The vast majority of the public loves KCI the way it is. It will be a big sell job to convince them that the new terminal is the right way to go.
And for opponents of the airport, just got another big talking point a few weeks ago. Don't forget when Spirit Airlines announced they were coming to KCI. One of the advocates of the airports have always said a single terminal might bring new airlines, might be a part of that. Spirit made the decision to add service to Kansas City with that not really part of the conversation at all.
One story this week talking about even on the construction of this might not even begin until 2017, so we wouldn't even be seeing Brooks Brothers and other fine stores and restaurants coming to a brand new terminal for quite a few years yet to come.
That's correct, Nick. It would be 2017. My guess is it might even take longer than that. Let's assume, for example, that they go to voters in 2016, a presidential election year, a high turnout year. That seems to make some sense. And then it would take another 6 months to a year to get the bond structure in place, to get the revenue coming in, to get the design work done. We saw that on Bartle Hall, for example. So it might be closer to 2018 before construction really begins.
Next up on Week in Review, overriding Nixon. Missouri Republicans hand Governor Jay Nixon the biggest defeat of his second term, overturning his veto and forcing into law a $620 million tax cut.
Senate Bill 509 mimics the tax cuts passed by Kansas 2 years ago. Tax cuts that have already forced harmful cuts to schools and destabilized their economy.
The debate over whether the tax reductions will lead to economic prosperity or budgetary ruin will likely rage for years. But what do the tax cuts mean to you? According to the Missouri Department of Revenue, a family of four earning $44,000 a year will get a tax cut of about $32 when the law is fully implemented. A family of four with a business owner in the household making $100,000 a year would see a $1,600 a year saving. Reading some of the press releases, though, that I received this week, the cuts will lead to nothing short of Armageddon in the Show Me State, jeopardizing funding for essential state services like schools, and all, according to Governor Nixon, to save the average Missourian the cost of an oil change every year, Patrick?
Well, first of all, I think to describe this as a sort of cataclysmic tax cut is to almost argue that any tax cut is cataclysmic. This tax cut doesn't really come into being until 2017, and it's phased in over the course of several years. You're talking about 0.5% off of your current tax rate. So I think it's a step in the right direction, quite frankly. I wish it was larger. And it's a step in the right direction because if you look across the country, states are cutting income taxes right now. And not only that, it's not as if the state is against the idea of cutting taxes. I mean, look at the Boeing special session from last year. If it's okay to cut taxes for a single corporation, I think it's appropriate to assume that you can cut taxes for everyone else as well.
What is the opposite side to that, Dave Helling?
Well, you heard some of it from Jay Nixon, who has said, in essence, this is a tax cut in what he has called a low-tax state. Missouri's tax rates are relatively low if you don't include local taxes, which are very high. And his argument is that a general broad-based tax cut is unnecessary, will cause cuts to important programs like higher education and schools. And crucially, Nick, I think, will argue that it won't do what supporters say it will do, which is bring thousands of jobs and provide a shot in the arm to the economy in the state of Missouri. And while we can all discuss the merits of whether people deserve a tax cut or not in the state of Missouri, the evidence in Kansas to date suggests that major tax cuts are not the economic driver that Sam Brownback and Republicans have said they would be over the last year and a half. The evidence simply shows that the job growth in Kansas lags behind neighbor states, that income tax collections have dropped dramatically. They just haven't worked or done what supporters have said they would do.
Garrett.
I think the one thing that's interesting comparing this to the Kansas tax cut is the built-in requirement that as a predication for this, revenue has to continue to grow by a certain percentage. I think it's $150 million over whatever the target is each year. So that protects a little bit against sort of accidentally overcutting your bounds here and ending up with less on the table. I also asked Governor Brownback about this a couple of days ago, and he saluted this cut as something good for the region and pivoted immediately to talking about competing with Texas. So I think it might change the economic conversation a little bit about Missouri and Kansas competing to some kind of idea of a regional competition here that would be interesting to follow.
What about the Kansas experience then? If it hasn't worked in Kansas, or do you not agree with that, Patrick?
Well, I think it's a little early, and if you ask the folks in Kansas, they'll tell you that the revenue that they're taking in is higher than expected. So, you know, at the end of the day, Missouri's tax cut is very different than what Missouri and Kansas tax cuts are very different from one another. And I think that to see what's going to happen in Kansas, it's going to take a few more years, but it's not the same thing between the two.
When you hear about the decimation of public schools in Kansas as a result of or in Missouri rather, as a result of this $600+ million tax cut in the state of Missouri, you don't buy that?
No, I don't. And I think if you look at how education has been funded over the last decade, I mean, it is growing how much we're funding it. And I think going forward, you're going to see that it to continue to grow in funding as well.
You know, we often see press releases, though, for any change that occurs in government about the horror stories. Do they always pan out the way we expect them to, though, Dave Helling?
No, and which I think is an important lesson for us to learn in both Missouri and Kansas, and that is that using tax policy as an economic development tool, either for Boeing or Ford, or generally for the public, is an extraordinarily blunt instrument that has unpredictable consequences in both directions. We're seeing that in Kansas. It's almost impossible to sit here today, Nick, and tell you what the impact of the Missouri tax cuts will be in 2018. Macro trends are important. Changes in the economy across the country will have some relevance there. So I think Patrick and others are right when they say that it's a little early to panic in either state. Having said that, what has happened in Kansas, it has happened. We know what has happened in the first year. It has not been what they projected it would be. And so, you know, for those who expect some big blooming flowers in Missouri, they may be, based on the Kansas experience, disappointed.
Speaking of Kansas, Kansas lawmakers finished their business for the year, ending their shortest annual session in 40 years. It was the briefest stint they've had in Topeka since 1974. What was their biggest accomplishment, Dave?
Well, I think they avoided a bloodbath over school finance in Kansas. That I think was the thing that most people feared, that the Supreme Court would order a huge increase in state spending on schools. That would touch off a constitutional crisis, a showdown between the judiciary and the legislative branches. That didn't happen, in part because the Supreme Court, I think, was smart enough to realize they shouldn't push the issue this time, and they did not. And the legislature stepped up and came up with another $130 million for schools. That buck has been passed, but they avoided a major, major problem on that issue.
Garrett, were there other successes?
I think the decision to open criminal charging records is a huge success. We've reported on this extensively at Channel 41. One of my colleagues, Melissa Yeager, has been all over this. Kansas was the only state of the nation where those documents remain closed to the public. As a journalist and as anyone who wants to sort of bird dog the criminal justice system, opening those records is a big step for Kansas.
How about failures?
Well, even the discussion of the discrimination bill, the spanking bill, we had a number of bills that didn't come to pass that, again, sort of put Kansas in this backward flyover country light. Fortunately, those bills were quickly shelved, but those discussions are probably not good for the state's reputation.
Dave, did you put one down as the biggest failure of the session?
No, I don't think there. It was a very neutral session of the legislature if you take out the discussion over the budget and tax policy, which of course is very important, but the differences of opinion are very strong, and you don't think that they would have solved it this year or made some move back to the middle going forward. One of the things we need to note, Nick, that's important to keep in mind is, first of all, this tax cut, the Kansas budget, will be a huge issue in this November's election between Paul Davis and Sam Brownback. And if the Kansas numbers continue to be poor, Kansas lawmakers can raise taxes or do something to make. That isn't the case in Missouri. If the Missouri tax cuts turn out worse than people expect, they'll have to go back to voters to get people to raise taxes. That's a very strong difference between the two states and suggests the difficulty in Missouri will be addressed differently than it is in Kansas going forward.
Should Kansas City's poorest residents be forced to quit smoking? In a story that's attracting national attention, Kansas City, Missouri is drawing praise and scorn this week for imposing a smoking ban in all public housing. The new policy, which goes into effect July 1, will affect more than 1,700 residential units and about 5,000 adults and children living in Kansas City public housing. The ban blocks smoking indoors and even on outdoor grounds. But why is the city trying to regulate illegal behavior? Lynn, you've been reporting on this week.
Well, it's not the city, it's the Housing Authority, which is actually a separate agency, but they feel strongly that this is a public health issue, it is a safety issue, and it's a cost issue. There was a fire in one of their high-rises where a smoker was on oxygen, caused a fire, wound up in the burn unit at KU, damaged a number of units that cost $250,000 to fix, and put at risk everybody else living in that high-rise. You know, your right to smoke stops where my right to breathe begins. And they've done air quality tests in some of these units and found that the smoke migrates from the smokers' units to the hallways. I think they just feel that at this point in time, it is enough of a public health issue that they need to get people to try to stop smoking. Now, I don't want to suggest that if people cannot stop smoking tomorrow, they're going to be evicted from their units. They have a 6-month sort of grace period. It doesn't really take effect till the beginning of next year. And even then, they said they will work with the residents.
Garrett.
I think you raise a really interesting point. Is my right to smoke stronger if I don't need to rely on public assistance to pay for where I live? I mean, you get into a very slippery slope here, regardless of what you think of this, if you can regulate the lives of poorer people because they are poorer people. I mean, if you think of the New York soda ban as another example of a government regulating legal behavior, but imagine if that applied only to people who bought their drinks at a down market bodega.
Patrick.
Well, I mean, I don't have a problem with the city or the authority itself saying, you know what, for safety reasons, we don't want these places burning down. And also there's the financial aspect of having to rehab those spaces after someone leaves. But if folks want to continue to smoke, they can, of course, go to other apartment complexes that permit it. It just won't be publicly funded. And I think that if they want to make that decision, that's fine. Just like private apartment owners can set priorities for what people can and cannot do in those confines. I think it's the same.
If you're in public housing, you probably don't have options for other places for your apartment. It's not that you have a wide variety of options to make that choice if you're accepting public assistance on where you're living.
I don't disagree with that, but the fact is that I think it is fair for rules to be set forward that make sure that people don't burn down the units of the people next door to them.
Now, I was curious because this has really sort of picked up quite a lot of national attention, and mainly in minority newspapers and web articles. Has there been any backtracking now on this ban or any changes to it based on some of the publicity that has come out as a result of this?
I don't believe so, but Garrett's exactly right. I mean, people do feel like, first of all, they do pay rent. It's not like this is free housing. They pay rent. They feel like these are their homes. They have a right to do what they choose in the privacy of their own homes, especially illegal activity. But I think the Housing Authority wants to get going on this, and they certainly aren't the only housing authority to do this. It's been done on both coasts and is becoming more prevalent throughout the country.
But this would be the largest ban of its kind, isn't that what was in your story?
In this region, I believe. The other thing is the Housing Authority has said, look, we are going to try this. We need to get people to start trying to quit smoking. We're going to provide cessation classes. If it doesn't work, we can reevaluate. Perhaps we can move people to other developments that have a mix of units where a policy doesn't currently apply.
There might be a middle ground here, too, that I haven't seen discussed, possibly the idea of grandfathering this in for newer residents. I mean, I can't help but think of someone who might have been smoking 75 years who's now told you have 6 months to quit. 6 months to quit might seem reasonable, but if you've been addicted to something for most of your adult life, that's a much tougher pill to swallow.
And a number of advocacy groups are raising that very concern. They say it does take longer than 6 months,
Yes.
and you're especially going to have to provide classes and help to these folks.
Downtown has yet to see its first streetcar, but that hasn't stopped planners figuring out ways to expand the transit system. Recently, routes south and east of the city were added to the election ballot for voters to decide later this year. But now, Kansas City is looking at what it can do to bring streetcars to the Northland. Are folks north of the river, first of all, Lynn, clamoring for streetcars?
Well, some of them are.
Okay.
They had a open house or a planning session in North Kansas City. And a number of the North Kansas City residents showed up and were very excited about this. But anybody who thinks that we're going to be able to take streetcars from downtown to the airport anytime soon better look at this study, because just getting it to the edge of North Kansas City, not even into Kansas City North, it's enormously expensive. Just getting over the river is $25 million, and getting it beyond into North Kansas City is almost $100 million. The Northland simply isn't dense enough. It doesn't have enough people and enough commercial activity.
So why is there a push for doing this when nothing has actually been laid thus far, Dave Helling?
Well, because there's a certain cachet, presumably, for streetcars, for mass transit, for fixed rail mass transit. But I think Lynn points out an extraordinarily important thing, and that is that it's very expensive and that the federal money, of course, for it has dried up or is almost dried up. And so when you ask residents to, in essence, tax themselves to this degree for something that sort of looks good or will be fun, that's a tough hurdle to climb when the utilitarian nature of streetcar, that is getting to the airport, taking you to a job or back, is less important than maybe the cachet around it, and that's just a tough
Streetcars could get people to a job. That's a good thing for the economy, Patrick.
That is a good thing for the economy, but there are lots of ways to get to a job. I mean, and when a lot of these streetcars were first put into place, they were responding to a need. I mean, there were private companies that were actually installing these, and so we have this discussion now about there not being enough density to support it. Well, that's kind of the point. We're also told that south of the river that it's going to create density. So in one case, we have low density. That's why it won't work. South of the river, it's going to help density. That's why it's going to work. I think that really we need to make sure that there is actually a market for this. And if there is going to be a market for it, I think it'll probably arise more organically anyway.
We should probably just press pause on this discussion for another 4 or 5 years. The way the Northland is growing, you might see some more of that density in a few years. And you'll have a much better sense of what the ridership's going to be south of the river, where this is already being done.
Yeah, and in the interim, I think they're talking about bus rapid transit, maybe other ways. Streetcars and mass transit do provide connections, and the Northland really would like to be more connected, especially to downtown. People in North Kansas City would like a connection to downtown. But streetcars are probably some years off.
Or they could do the Lyft rideshare program in the Northland, but the city said no to that, so perhaps not. In a conservative state like Missouri, no lawmakers want to be seen as soft on crime, and certainly not soft on drugs. But this week, the Missouri legislature surprisingly passed a pair of laws that take a more lenient view on marijuana. The first addresses all those people you read about heading to Colorado because of serious medical conditions.
To get normal and to be a normal kid.
He'll draw up like this. He'll start convulsing. He'll foam at the mouth. He'll make horrible guttural sounds. It's awful.
This 16-year-old boy from Liberty would be among those helped by a bill sent to the governor's desk allowing patients with severe epilepsy to use cannabis oil for treatment. Another bill green-lighted by legislators and sent to Governor Nixon eliminates jail time for those caught with less than 10 grams of marijuana and have no previous drug offenses on their records. These are modest steps in contrast to states like Colorado. But what has changed in the mentality of Missouri lawmakers to take even these steps? Garrett?
Well, you're seeing the science change, and you're seeing surrounding states adopt this more quickly. As more study is done on some of these cannabis-based medical treatments, you're seeing them become more acceptable. In the case of the 16-year-old boy from Liberty, the cannabis oil there has almost none of the ingredient that would get a user high. There's no recreational use for that kind of drug. It's purely a medical treatment, and I think many state legislators, perhaps including Missouri's, feel like there's relatively low risk to approving a program.
But doesn't
like
it seem surprising that we've seen these steps, Patrick?
I think maybe to a certain extent, but you see over the last couple of years a real movement, I think, in the state toward greater flexibility in healthcare access and the medication related to it. Last year, you had the Volunteer Health Services Act passed, and that allows for out-of-state medical professionals to come and provide charitable care. This year you have Right to Try, which is also called the Dallas Buyers Club bill. It allows for greater access to experimental medication for terminally ill patients. I think that's all kind of part of the same movement.
So will we be seeing then perhaps a fuller expansion of marijuana permissible in the state of Missouri on the ballot sometime soon?
Well, I don't know if it'll be
Dave?
on the ballot, but the trend is extraordinarily clear that medical marijuana is sort of the first step, and then states across the country are legalizing access to marijuana, not just for medical, but for recreational purposes as well. And you can almost see it coming in Missouri now. Next year, probably not. 5 years, maybe not. 10, 15 years. Kansas and Missouri almost certainly will follow Colorado and other states in expanding access to these kinds of products.
And that is our week in review. Our thanks to our news reviewers. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us here at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us. Protect.